Why we love the Tang Dynasty, exploring the history and charm of what's seen as one of the greatest imperial dynasties in Chinese history. Episode 15, The Rise and Rise of Buddhism in Tang China. In this episode, we'll assess the role of Buddhism on the development of China during the Tang Dynasty and the key figures who raised this religion to new heights. I'm Bob Jones, and in this podcast series, we're getting to know the Tang Dynasty and attempting to discover how, at its height, it was possibly the most prosperous, interconnected, and innovative country in the world, with a rich and influential legacy that survives to this day. Thought in Chinese history has been dominated by three main belief systems, with perhaps Confucianism rising to the top over the generations. Confucianism, based on the ideas of Confucius, who lived around the 5th century BC, emphasizes benevolence and love and a respect for the system of hierarchy. It prizes education and observation highly. It was underpinned by the ideas of Mencius, who advocated benign government and philosophy. As such, it was very appealing to the Tang Dynasty, which liked order and openness, education and self-expression. But there were other philosophers on the block. Round about the same time as Confucius, the 6th century BC, a chap called Lao Tzu created Taoism. Taoism, or Taoism, emphasized living in harmony with the Tao, a force that exists within everything. But crucially to our story of the Tang, there was also Buddhism. Once again, it was created in about the 6th century BC and promoted the belief that human life is essentially miserable, and the main goal was spiritual emancipation. One had to know oneself, had to avoid thoughts of sensuality, ill will or cruelty, had to reject lies, slander and frivolous conversation. One had to be self-controlled and upright in one's actions, and had to avoid work that included trading in slaves, alcohol, poisons, weapons and meat. It reached China round about the time that Jesus Christ was born. Once in China, it evolved into many sects and set down firm roots. It gladly embraced many of the ideas of Confucianism and Taoism during the Tang period, creating a powerful belief system that played a very important role in traditional ideology and art. The early Tang period was a fertile time for Buddhism in China. Buddhist monasteries thrived, and monks fulfilled many important social roles. Scholarly monks, who specialized in such arts as poetry, painting and calligraphy, studied Buddhist philosophy, practiced techniques of concentration, and debated points of doctrine with priests in monasteries or mountain hermitages. By the 8th century, Buddhism was widely accepted and recognized as the dominant faith throughout the Tang Empire. The principles of Buddhism were respected, and its spiritual truths were unchallenged. It was seen as a universal religion. Buddhism, however, travelled a rocky road through the dynasty, with various rulers taking contrary positions towards it. Emperor Taizong, for example, didn't want to alienate the Buddhists, but did take measures to keep them under his thumb. When Emperor Gaozong came to power in 649, he attempted to restrict the number of monks, regulate the monasteries, and have monks pay obeisance to the state. The monks argued that this policy went against their vows and put the frighteners on the emperor by suggesting his rules would destroy any chance of his own salvation and bring disaster to the empire. Strong argument. Empress Wu Zetian, who assumed power in 690, was perhaps the most important figure where Buddhism is concerned. In keeping with her high opinion of herself, she declared herself the reincarnation of Maitreya, the Buddha of love. She ordered temples set up in every province to explain the Great Cloud Sutra, also known as the Da Yun Jing. Emperor Xuanzong was less malleable. He refused to grant Buddhism any imperial favors in the construction of monasteries, mass ordination of monks, or involvement in ceremonies. He tried, however, to reinforce the connection between the monasteries and the imperial institutions by calling on monks to celebrate the emperor's birthday and to install images of Buddha in the likeness of the ruler. A neat trick. It's probably wrong to see Buddhism in China at the time as one religion though, as there were in fact 8 sects, only 4 of which enjoyed success. See them maybe as flavors of Buddhism. The Tiantai school took its name from the sacred mountain in Zhejiang in southeastern China. This was an entirely Chinese concept. It sought to combine the scholarly traditions with pietism and meditation. As such, it gained the greatest official support. They upheld 3 truths: that all phenomena were empty, that people exist temporarily, and they themselves were above both temporariness and emptiness. The Huayan school was the sect supported by Empress Wu. It claimed to be the pick-a-mix of all sects, uniting the best of all the doctrines. They injected a little cause and effect into the debate. The Pure Land school developed a concept of some kind of Western paradise or ultimate bliss. It suggested that you had to really believe, and that in itself would allow you to reach a state of grace. Chanism, or the meditation school, was created by an Indian master who arrived in the court of the Northern Way about 100 years before the Tang. It was a mystical sect which absorbed some aspects of Taoism. Mainly, you had to sit quietly and wait for enlightenment. The Tang Dynasty entertained the 2 most famous pilgrims of Chinese Buddhist history. Both lived in the 7th century. Leaving China secretly in 629, Xuanzang travelled overland to India to gather Buddhist manuscripts. He arrived in northern India and visited all the important Buddhist sites in search of knowledge. He returned to the Tang capital Chang'an some years later. He produced a huge amount of Buddhist texts in translation and disseminated the religion throughout China. If this all sounds familiar, it's the basis of one of the best known of the 4 classic works of Chinese literature, Journey to the West, which was written in the 16th century. The other pilgrim was Yi Jing, who boarded a merchant ship in 671 to also travel to India, and was welcomed by Empress Wu Zetian on his return. His legacy was 2 famous historical books, one on Buddhism in India and Southeast Asia, and a second on pilgrimages to Buddhist countries. There was actually a pilgrimage organized by the Tang government itself, which involved 150 monks. Only a small number made it to India, and even fewer made it back to Tang to tell of their adventures. As we know, many Japanese monks traveled to Tang China in order to learn about Buddhism and then take their knowledge back to Japan. One of them, a monk called En-in, wrote a diary packed with tidbits of information about China-Japan relations and the people he met, which has proven invaluable to historians. Buddhism played a considerable role in Tang society. In the countryside, Buddhist temples performed important economic functions. They operated mills and oil presses, maintained vaults for the safe deposit of valuables, and managed other banking services, such as serving as pawnbrokers. Some temples even provided medical care and entertainment, while others invested most of their wealth in art. The character of Xuanzang seems to have been very powerful indeed. Once, when Emperor Taizong of Tang was sick, he called for Xuanzang and asked him to turn his back on all this Buddhism stuff and come back to being an official. Xuanzang was resolute and said he wanted to finish translating the scriptures. His stance earned the respect of the emperor, who personally wrote a preface to Xuanzang's newly translated work. Close to the end of his life, he took Buddhism closer to his heart, and Xuanzang closer still. The 12-volume masterpiece, The Records of the Western Regions, is now regarded as one of the most important academic records in the world. In all, he and his disciples translated 75 Buddhist scriptures consisting of 1,335 volumes. He died in 664 AD, when the then Emperor Gaozong ordered a state funeral. After the Tang Dynasty, Buddhism was to decline in influence and Confucianism was to get a second wind, especially during the Song Dynasty. Even so, it remains influential in China, even to this day. Special thanks go out to San Lian Zhongdu for their help in creating the content for this show. This is Bob Jones. Thanks for listening. Join me again next time.